Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to introduce my recent work on the interaction between Chinese architecture and architecture in Africa. In particular, in this case, it's about Sudan. So I think there are 4 parts in my presentation. The first one is about political background in supporting the Chinese architecture engagement with Africa. And the second one is about the architects' geographical imaginations, in particular the tropical area. So moving on to the third part is a special case study in relation to today's conference. It's about the Friendship Hall in Khartoum in Sudan. And the last part is a brief reflections on imagination. So first of all, I would like to introduce some basic background about the Chinese engagement with the Soviet Union and also later in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. In 1949, when the People's Republic of China was established by the communists, so the PRC implemented a one-side policy towards the Soviet Union. So after that, China imported a variety of Soviet policies. For example, the centrally planned economy, and also the 5-year planning system, and the educational system, and the cultural policy of the so-called socialist realism, or we call it national inform, socialist in content. This has a great impact on architecture in Beijing and also in other rest of the Chinese cities. So here this poster showing what was happened in the Soviet Union is the goal of the Chinese society. One of the early examples about this architecture engagement between China and the Soviet is this exhibition center designed by Soviet architects and also built in Beijing. This building was used and also built as a venue to display the great achievements of Soviet socialist construction. So here you can see very clearly the dominant influence of Russian architecture languages, and it's also a Beaux-Arts-informed symmetrical layout. So this image is just showing what is going on in contemporary urban context. This building was not far from away my university. So, and even today, it became a very important venue for a variety of exhibition activities. So aside from the Soviet experts designing buildings, cultural buildings, another aspect of the Soviet influence in China is the 156 heavy industrial factories designed and built with the assistance of the Soviet experts. So those industrial projects laid a very solid foundation for the Chinese industrial economy. And here you can probably see just in a central province, this is my hometown, there are 10 factories designed by Soviet experts. And many of those factories are still operating today. So, however, the China's relation to the Soviet Union experienced a variety of periods in the 1950s. At the beginning, it was a kind of political alliance. And in the middle 1950s, the two countries experienced a kind of honeymoon. But in the later 1950s, the relations become with many disagreement and ideological conflicts. And eventually, in the early 1960s, the two countries has a kind of political rupture or political split. This is very important because it significantly influenced China's diplomatic relations with the other rest of the countries. So, for example, in the later 1950s, Chairman Mao meets a lot of young friends from developing countries, from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. I think this image represents a kind of ideological turn to other developing countries. I think there are three reasons behind this ideological turn. I will introduce it later. So, for example, since the early 1960s, young leaders from Guinea President Sekou visited Beijing. He met Chairman Mao, and 4 years later, the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai also visited 10 countries in Asia and Africa, including Guinea, Conakry. So those images represent the very dynamic diplomatic activities between China and the rest of the world. So it was during this period, the People's Republic of China began to provide assistance to other developing countries. First, to its neighbors, and for example, North Korea and Vietnam, in fighting the invasion of the United States, and later to Mongolia, Laos, Cambodia, and Indonesia as well. And in the early 1960s, the assistance went to Africa, Guinea, and also to Sri Lanka. So as I said earlier, the three reasons behind the appearance of the Chinese aid. One of them is to compete with the influence of Soviet Union in other developing countries, because of the ideological conflicts between Mao and the Soviet communist. The second purpose is to resist the US hegemony of the so-called imperialism in many developing countries in Africa. And the third one is to compete with the influence of the Republic of China, or the so-called Taiwan, on the international stage. So one of the examples of this architecture aid produced in this context is a hotel designed by architects from Beijing, from the Beijing Industrial Architecture Design Institute in Mongolia. So this is a very modernist architecture. Its formal languages is quite different from the domestic practice, which was influenced by the Soviet socialist realism. So here I would like to use a very interesting map to make a comparison between the so-called the tropical area, as also mentioned by Professor Ezra in her presentation. So here you can see many of the tropical areas are also the countries of the so-called the third world. So this is a very important information, because when delivering architecture aid in the developing countries, so the Chinese architects have to think about how to respond to the tropical geography and also to tropical climate and society as well. So in my presentation, I would like to use geographical imagination as a special theoretical framework to illustrate how the Chinese officials and building professionals to imagine the rest of the world. So here, geographical imagination particularly emphasizes the role of space and place as a kind of complement to the sociologist Red Mill's concept of the sociological imagination, which emphasizes history and time. So many other geographers summarize this term geographical imagination as a way of thinking about the world and also considering the relative importance of place and the relationships between our places and other places. So for architects, geographical imagination is a precondition of design practice. So for architects, they also need to transform this geographical imagination into material form. So what is essential in this process is the ability to imagine and also to project new forms of architecture, as well as the tools and techniques available for such a task. So those production of geographical and architecture imagination is related to three aspects. The first one is the production of geographical knowledge about Africa. So this slide showing one of the earliest interactions between Chinese culture, which was displayed in an exhibition showing in Conakry in Guinea in the 1960s. So here you can see the planning of a typical Chinese people's commune was displayed as a kind of rural planning unit in rural China. So at the same time, a group of Chinese delegates and officials visit West Africa. I think because West Africa, in particular in Guinea, was the first country in West Africa to recognize the legitimacy of the People's Republic of China. So when the Chinese delegates went there, they engaged with the local communities, they demonstrate the Chinese culture and also learn from the local culture and society as well. When they came back, they published articles in the Chinese magazines to showing what was going on in Western Africa. I think this is one of the earliest materials available in China about Western Africa. So the second aspect about this production of knowledge is focus on tropical architecture in particular. When the Chinese architects were assigned the task to design buildings in those countries, one of the key challenges is to know the local condition of climate. So this is an article published by a Chinese architect called Chen Dengao. When he was designing a project in Guinea, in Conakry, he spent several months in the city visiting local buildings and summarized how the local architecture designed by Western European countries and also by the Soviet Union to respond to local tropical climate. Back to China, he summarized a variety of techniques that was used in those architecture design. And surely, those introduction it has a great impact on his domestic colleges in Beijing and also in China as well. So the third aspect is the appearance of those Chinese architects traveling to the recipient countries and what they can know about local architecture. Most of them were designed by European architects. For example, in Guinea in particular, many modernist buildings were designed by the Soviet Union and Western Africa. And also at the same time, the Chinese architects were accessible to the latest information published in English. For example, British architects Fry and Deroux, and particularly their tropical architecture books were accessible in a library in Beijing. So those become very important reference for the Chinese to understand what is going on in the tropical area. So moving on to the third part, I will use a special case study, that is the Friendship Hall in Sudan as a case study. The People's Republic of China and Sudan formally established diplomatic relations in 1959, just 5 years after independence in Sudan. So, but at that time, very few people traveled to Sudan. And there is also very little information about the condition of Sudan. So this article published in the 1960 is one of supposedly the earliest information available in China, in particular in the People's Republic of China about the conditions in Sudan. And in this article, the writer is also a journalist, visit Sudan and many cities, particularly the capital city of Khartoum. So in this article, he introduced the history of the climate and also the colonial history culture in this city. I think when the architects design buildings in Sudan, this article is one of the very valuable information about the country. So just 10 years later, in the 1970s, Sudanese President Nimeri traveled to China, and he visited many factories, people's communes, and cities in Beijing and Shanghai. And the two governments has signed economic and technical cooperation deals, including building a conference hall for Sudan by using the Chinese interest-free loan. So before introducing the Sudan Conference Hall, in the 1960s, the Chinese government has built 3 similar projects in other countries. The first one is in Sri Lanka, but this project was finished in the middle in 1973, and also including the People's Palace in Conakry, Guinea, and also the third one is the National Theatre of Somali. So all of those projects shared a very dramatic formal languages, that is the so-called tropical architecture characters. Both of those projects were designed from Beijing Industrial Architecture Design Institute, and design organization with connections with the Ministry of Construction. But in the later 1960s, this design institute was dismantled during the Cultural Revolution, and architects were sent to rural areas to receive labor education. So when the project of Sudan Friendship Hall was conceived in the early 1970s, so in Beijing, there is no architects were available for such a significant projects. So the Chinese government sent this project's design to Shanghai Civil Architecture Design Institute. This is the location of the Friendship Hall in the city of Khartoum. So the location is a strategic place in the city's planning. But at that time, the architects from Shanghai was not able to travel to Sudan for design survey. So that was in absence of information. Architects were conceived how to provide the design surveys for this political task. So what you can see in this image is a model. It is showing these projects include a variety of functions. The main volume is the office building. Behind this volume is the conference hall. I think it has more than 1,500 seat conference hall. And on the right side is the cinema. This cinema also plays a very important role in opening to the public. And the horizontal volume is the exhibition space. And the right left is the banquet hall, the 3-story building. So when the architects making a sketch about the conference hall, what you can see on the left side is the overall layout with symmetrical layout. I mean, this is very special because for the traditional political projects designed by the Chinese architects, the Beaux-Arts-informed symmetrical layout is the normal choice and widely recognized by officials. For example, one of the remarkable example is the Great Hall of People built in Beijing in 1959. So here you can see this is a very clear Beaux-Arts informed layout. And similarly, in Guinea, architects Chen Dengao also designed a modernist architecture with a symmetrical layout. During the design of the Friendship Hall, the local design institute provided 4 proposals. 3 are symmetrical layout. 1 is asymmetrical, and this asymmetrical one provided by architects Wang Dingzeng was selected by the Sudanese government. So here you can see the Sudan government play a very important role in making decision about the final proposal. Architects Wang Dingzeng, there is a later information in the English literature about his career and also about his work. So these architects were educated in Shanghai Jiaotong University in the 1970s. He majored in civil engineering. After his graduation, he studied in the United States, a major in architecture at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. After graduation, he back to China and worked as architect, educator, official in Shanghai. After the Communist Revolution, he became a chief architect of Shanghai Civil Architecture Design Institute. So this is an early image taken by someone during his study in the US. In the early 1950s, so this is one of the Wang Dingzeng's prominent design projects. It's a residential community built in suburban of Shanghai. So here you can see quite different from the Soviet design examples. The architects use a very flexible layout to respond to the urban context. So these buildings were once criticized by the Soviet experts, but for Wang Dingzeng, and it clearly showing his intention to innovate in specific design projects. And here he was inspired by American planning principle of the so-called neighborhood planning principles. So one of the early image after this building's construction, it's clearly showing how the building instant in the urban context in the south bank of the city of Khartoum. Some sketches about the design of the banquet hall showing the interior space. And this is the main conference hall as an assembly function for the Sudanese government. And this image is showing the contemporary scenario about this conference hall. And when the architects making this design, they were not able to travel for local area for design inspiration. And because of the Islamic culture, one of the reference the architects was able to seek is a local building in Beijing, the China Islamic Institute by the architects from Beijing. So here you can see in the Beijing projects, the Islamic cultural characters was expressed in the design of the point arch and also the domes with temple structures. Where for the Shanghai architects Wang Dingzeng, he transformed those traditional languages into a triangular arch with as a modern geography. So it was this kind of a creative transformation that presents the building a sense of lightness and a sense of abstractness. When this building was finished, the Chinese minister Fang Yi and visited this building and also attended the opening ceremony with the Sudanese President Nimeri. So, and also they also take a photo with the local Chinese engineers. Those Chinese engineers worked very hard. They spent several years on construction site and away from home. So this is a paragraph described by a Sudanese scholar, Ali, thanks to Suha's introduction. And the Chinese workers, builders worked very hard, day and night, but they always finish this task in time, and sometimes before the schedule. The Chinese works closely with the Sudanese engineers and laborers. When the Chinese receive a low wage, the Sudanese technicians are paid according to the prevailing cost. All the Chinese from the team leaders to the lowest technicians receive the same wage. So this paragraph described the principles of the Chinese aid, first formulated by the Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai in 1964 during his visit to Africa. So those principles, for example, the aid based on mutuality and equality and respect for sovereignty, using the interest-free credit, emphasize self-reliance and low investment and quick impacts, and also pursuing top quality equipment and of architecture. During this process, the Chinese Chinese technicians also train the local workers, and most importantly, they emphasize an equal wage. All of those principles are quite different from the Soviet principles, and this is one of the Chinese resistance to the domination of the Soviet counterpart in the process of providing assistance. So a recent image is showing the detail about the cinema. All of those, here you can see the sun shading device that was widely used on the facade of the building, and those sun shading devices were not innovated by the Chinese, but they also widely used in other parts of the world. And interestingly, those abstract design languages inspired the subsequent design projects. For example, the People's Palace in the city of Djibouti, also aided by the Chinese government. So here you can see the architects used triangular arches to form a specific Islamic culture identity. And a few years ago, the Chinese government also aided another addition to this project. They called the Presidential Hall as a part of the complex.
Excuse me?
Okay.
We have.
So I will quickly conclude. Yes, I will quickly conclude my presentation. In terms of the imagination, in my discussion, I use this diagram to summarize the dynamic process between the Chinese architects and their know-how of delivering architecture in their aided projects. They also learn from the global influence, architects from the local countries and also from Western European countries. And they apply those different kind of source of knowledge together with the local conditions to mix them into a sophisticated design practice in the local context. I think this is a very dynamic architecture interactions. So as the so-called tropical architecture was bound up with the colonial domination, where in the Chinese practice, those tropical design is less about political and racial domination, but more about economic rationality, that is saving money for the cost, and also to express the cultural identity. So those aided projects is a kind of instrument of cultural diplomacy. It was not only the Chinese export to the recipient nations, but also an embodiment of how the Chinese professionals to learn from the local culture and the local available techniques. So this project, the Friendship Hall, formulate alternative political identities, imaginations, and representations, in contrast to the condition of a colonial period of racial discrimination and segregation. They represented a Chinese intervention into the international political order, imagining and constructing the possibility of alternatives, and convincing a sense of political emancipation. So architects Wang Dingzheng's response to the requirement of function, identity, and placemaking was embodied in their design approach to dealing with climate, culture, context, materiality, and representation. The Chinese architects, represented by Wang Dingzheng, employed architecture imagination as a powerful tool to achieve the ultimate goal of geographical imagination, that is, the realization of the social change and the facilitation of spatial justice in the specific context. I think this is my end of my presentation. Thank you very much.